Hi there, welcome to our overview of the Nintex platform. Today we're going to focus on purchase and CAPEX requests, and we're going to look at a few of the individual elements or somewhat combined elements of the Nintex platform. So I'm going to start by having a look at the Manage section, which pertains to Nintex ProMap. So we've got a half-documented process that we're going to tweak, configure, and publish just to show how quick and easy that side of the platform is. And then we're going to move from the theoretical, so the way that we do things on paper, in-app, to the practical. So actually moving a request through a certain set of gates and actually doing something with the application. So we're going to look at Forms Mobile, which is data ingestion, and workflow, which is data process. And part of that data process, we're going to look at document automation. So taking a templated document, a set of live bits of information, such as a unique instance request, and then making a very quick unique document and passing that for electronic signatory. There are other parts of the Nintex platform that can make up a final solution, such as before ProMap, the ability to discover processes that may not be obvious to the business. So nodes listening for user interaction with applications, looking for pattern recognition, commonality, and volume, and discovering processes as a result. And also optimizing, so taking what we've learned as it's ran through a workflow and visualizing it. So whether it's point-in-time decisions, deltas between events occurring, or simply the volume of a specific request. And for any legacy or highly repetitive practical examples, we have RPA, so the ability to connect to applications that may not be API friendly, web service friendly, or ordinarily require a human to perform a set of actions. So we're going to start in Nintex ProMap. And Nintex ProMap is a SaaS application, so everything is stored online, everything is accessed online. Nintex ProMap has a mobile application as well, so processes on the move. And it's all roles-based, so each individual is dedicated a role, so that could be everything from simply a viewer or read-only participant in process, all the way up to a ProMaster, so somebody with admin rights and configuration rights. Now, in between that, there are shared roles of process owner and process expert. So we appreciate that processes obviously have an owner as somebody who the success of the process hinges upon, and that may well be a head of department. And we have experts, so people that live and breathe that process on a daily basis. And we find that the two, when it comes to process, work harmoniously. Searching for a process, pretty straightforward. So if I was to search for an advertised position process as an example, it's going to do that type ahead, which is actually the same behavior that is afforded to creating a process. So we don't want to create duplicates. So if I go to create a process, I'll pop it in my demo hub there, and I was to do an advertise process, it's going to do that type ed for me. So it's going to sort of limit me to the amount of replication and duplication that I actually do when it comes to creating processes. As you'll see, when I'm creating a process, I do need an owner and I need an expert. So as we said, the owner being somebody who's responsible for a successful outcome of that process, and the expert may well be somebody who lives and breathes it on a daily basis. What's the objective? Then we'll show you that in a second as to how that rolls up overall and the background of that process. I've got my recently viewed processes, and we do find that users live in here quite considerably, and we've got our favorites as well. So the ability to favorite a process that you are accessing commonly. Everybody's dashboard is going to look slightly different depending on your role within the process ecosystem. Are you an owner, an expert responsible for risk sign-off, for instance? Do you get feedback from processes? And all of this is also delivered in a timely email digest, which you can choose the frequency of. So we're going to look at my purchase request process, and we're going to make some amendments to it based on the business. And when you'll notice that when I open it up, it opens in a map view. So I've got my process map, which shows me the responsible swim lanes, shows me the tiles, which contain the work instructions that need to be carried out. And then it shows me along the bottom my action toolbar. So everything from the summary, which was what we discussed when we created the new process there, which was what's the objective of the process, any background, any review date, so we can edit that. Reviewing processes is massively important, making sure they're up to date, still relevant, and so on. My change log is going to contain any information as this process evolves. Great audit trail, including things like feedback that's been provided and amendments that have been made to the process. ProMap does have a small document capability where you can upload, store, and version documents as they relate to processes. So things like policy manuals, procedures, even imagery and video can be part of a process. We can look at the cycle cost. So for each stage, obviously, there is a time to participate or a time to complete. When it comes to the cycle cost, what we're going to do there is calculate simply the active time that has been put into the process with an administrative role-based average salary. So that's something that the ProMaster would do. We're going to get ourselves a cost, so active time times the salary. We're going to get the cost to perform, but then we're going to have a volume of how many times we do this particular process in a calendar year, which gives us a total annual cost. Now, the interesting thing about cycle cost is that when we begin to evolve a process, what we might consider doing is creating a variation where we would take a business analyst thought process of current state and future state. We can make amendments to the future state to see if that would reduce the cost to do the workflow or to do the activity. It's a great way to forecast cost savings or cost analysis as it pertains to process. Systems logs. If a system either plays an active role or is involved in a process, this is a clever way to actually not only map that out, but also report for things like outages or upgrades or simply any change management process that might involve some downtime. We can actually, using our systems register, log what that potential impact would be. And this was something that we did when we made the ProMap acquisition, which was looking at which processes involved Dynamics CRM. Nintex uses Salesforce, ProMap used Dynamics. So we were able to effectively see who had to participate in that process migration from a sales operations point of view and what potential overlap was. ProMap will support tagging. Custom tagging can also be added up within the admin area or a lean tagging methodology. So it will support tagging. And finally, we've got our to-do along the action board on the bottom. So if it is late in the day, I've got quite a bit left to do in my process, I can add to-do an area of the process, and that's actually going to allow me to see exactly where I left off. And it's almost like a little sticky note reminder to pick up where I was. Now, if I go to the procedure, new menu item up the top, this is going to explain this process in a lot more granular detail. These are the work instructions. So I can see under my 1A, completing an attached requisition form. This might well have been a document in the past before sort of pre-automation view. But then I've got, does the size of the purchase make a difference? I'm using the notes here to do that 1 or 2% frequently asked questions, or the what if, which ordinarily in something like a Visio might be a somewhat clumsy branch or a diamond or a shape that really isn't relevant to the happy path of the process. I've left myself some work to do, which is uploading a form, and then we've got my individual elements here. So we can add sub-processes, inherited processes, a hierarchy process as well. We're using my triggers and inputs. So the employee wants to make a purchase is the trigger. and we're going with an estimate of 3 a month. And then the input is metadata. What is the input that actually goes into the process? Complete a form with department, item, cost, or budget, something like that. Any outputs and triggers, so your KPIs or a document or a particular finish line. We've covered costs. And then we've got things like my dependencies, so any linked processes, and then my RACI, so a responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed framework within that particular process. Now, one of the other important parts of ProMap is the ability to identify risk and when it occurs within the actual process. Process and risk, they are linked as a risk will occur within a process. So ProMap has a risk register that will allow you to log risk, remediate risk, score risk, but also hold people accountable to that remediation. So things like risk sign-off is massively important. And when you want to add risk to a particular process, that's going to be highlighted with an exclamation mark, and it's going to be fully explained as to what that risk is and what mitigation has occurred or needs to occur to avoid the risk. And it is something that we're seeing a lot of, potentially a sort of post-COVID risk becoming a lot more obvious, or also even just to simply say that you have ticked the audit box from a compliance point of view and you have identified risk. Now, if I go back to my map or in my procedure view, I can leave feedback around the process. So depending on whether it is no particular activity task, so we could say that it's maybe an outdated, this is an outdated process, please archive. That's going to go to my owner or expert, or I can go to a particular stage. So we can say form area 1B, we could say we now have an e-form for this process. And as part of this, I can get a response. And so that is going to create a sort of small service desk ticket to the owner and expert for my process. And when I edit the process, I'm going to add those people in there. I can submit. That is going to go into my change log, but it's also going to alert these two personas that there has been some feedback and that a response is required. Now, this is something that we did implement not too long ago, and one of the trends that we saw around response required was a huge uptake in change within ProMap. And when we started to drill into this with our process experts, process owners, and ProMasters, we found that really the core growth in that particular area was because people hated to see the color red. That was the feedback that we got, was they hated to see responses required here, or an overall process health on their dashboard was actually dipping. And that was really something that moved process improvement forward, was this tiny little check box within feedback required. So creating that collaboration and cross-function as it pertains to process, it really helped improve people's process health. A couple of other things in the top right. You can print a PDF, or you can print a hard copy of a process. We mentioned favoriting before, so I can add or remove that to my favorite. You can share processes, which is either an internal, so it's going to share that via email, or you can share the process link externally. We call this a mini mode. So read-only view of the process. It sort of removes a lot of the framing, removes a lot of the business specific side of things, but it is something that can be shared with stakeholders of that process, whether internal or external. Now, you can import and export into ProMap, so from either a procedure text or XML. This one we're looking at here, for instance, is an import from our gallery.nintex.com, which is a set of pre-built processes that we've shared, as well as workflows and RPA bots. So we're going to make a real quick edit to this process. I'm actually going to go to the summary, and I'm going to add an owner and an expert. So we need an owner. So we will add an owner. That's going to do a quick search. And I'm going to add an expert here. So we'll make this Thomas. This is in my demo process group. But one of the things we see a lot of organizations do is follow their own departmental hierarchy. So you would have sales and finance and HR and marketing processes, because that allows that owner and expert relationship to be easier to find. It's not set in stone that it has to do that, and you can use process shortcuts from additional groups. So we might find that some of the pre-sales processes that we have are relevant to the sales org, for instance. Display type is an option, so you can actually choose to bypass the map, which is something that we see people do a lot of when they're trying to really differentiate from a tool like Visio. The comparisons with ProMap and Visio really end at the map. Therefore, quite a few organizations are removing that from Diction altogether. So I'm going to save that. I could change the review date down there as well. I think it's set for 1 month away. Sorry, 6 months away. You can edit that as well. I'm going to go to my procedure view here, and I'm going to make a small change. Now, if I wanted to add a whole new activity, I can add an activity. I would give that activity a name. So it's popped down there to number 5. But what we might say is, let's just put something demo stage 5 here. We can assign a role to that. So we'll say that this one's going to be finance, which will grab the finance group. And then we can add our work instructions. So we save that. And then we can add my specific work instructions under stage 5. Or if I need to, I can simply move stage 5 into place. It's now going to become stage 3, and I can begin to add the specific pieces of work instruction that make that stage what it is. So we could add an image here, we could add a specific document, a video, or we can just add subtasks. So we could say do something here and select that, and then we can add another task, which is do something else. Right. And then if we go back to my map, save, and we'll go back to my map, we should have that new stage as a new tile within the map. There we go. There's my new stage down at stage 5. We've got a new output as a result. But we'll edit and we'll delete that stage 5, because what we want to do after we publish is actually move this straight into the automation layer. So we'll just delete this one here. Save. And then publish. So we want to provide an explanation. Again, this is going to go into my audit log. So we'll say added owner and expert as part of demo and publish. Now, there's a small publishing approval workflow within ProMap that can be turned on or off depending on the group or depending on the process itself. Ours has automatically approved, and a couple of things have changed as a result of being an approved process. You'll notice here we've got checklists. You'll notice we have V1.0, so we're now using a bit of draft and major minor versioning in here. We can review this process now that it's been published. So we can actually rate processes, and we can request automation. So we can actually move this straight to a Nintex Workflow Cloud environment as a ready-built workflow. And finally, we can create a checklist based on this process itself. And checklists, a way I would define them, are sort of workflow light. It's where you want to simply create a point-in-time checklist for a specific example. So you could say that this is the purchase request for my Dell servers, and these are the things that we need to do, and I've done them, or I need to assign a due date, or I need to assign them to something else. So a very quick in ProMap mini approval workflow, if you like. We'll discard, and you can get a full roll up of all of the checklists that have been completed. So we'll just pop back to that process, and we'll do one final thing. We're going to request automation. So we're going to move into the workflow layer. So now we sort of covered the theoretical, and this is very easy for me now as an end user to come into ProMap, to have a look at the process, and to make sure that I'm keeping myself honest across the process, and that this is the way we do things. So this is what ProMap is. It is a set of instructions that cement the fundamentals around how we want process to be handled. It's all inclusive. You'll notice there are no BPM notations in here. There's no Lean Six Sigma definitions or methodologies or frameworks in here. The object of ProMap is to be inclusive to the business. It's for day 1, day 1000. and whatever the role requires. So we're going to request automation. And what this does is this forms a connection between the process and the workflow. And what I've done, I've simply configured this ProMap environment to point to an Nintex Workflow Cloud environment. So what I want to do first is select a start event. So for a purchase request or a CAPEX request, that's going to kick off with a form. And then I can use my workflow mapping, and this should start to look familiar. On the left-hand side, I have my work instructions. So I have those individual activities that made up the process, the theory. And on the right, I have a set of toolbox actions that correspond to what's available in Nintex Workflow Cloud. So everything from assigning a task and sending an email through to integrating with Active Directory, Dynamic CRM, so on and so forth. Even things like calling a web service if such a connection doesn't exist. So as we map out those actions, it does a pretty good job using a bit of natural language processing from the activity to what's available. You can click on Create. This is then going to create a workflow definition in my Nintex Workflow Cloud environment. It's going to drag and drop all of those actions across the canvas, and it's going to name them. And almost most importantly, it's going to alert my admin of workflow that a request for process has been created. Now that ability isn't open to everybody. It is a ProMaster level engagement. We don't want everybody creating workflows left, right, and center. And it is intended for someone who appreciates that this process is ready to go to the automation stage. So if I now click on purchase request, this is going to direct me to a Nintex Workflow Cloud environment that I'll be able to really quickly build a workflow from. Now, I have already built a workflow for capital expenditure, and it's got a few more bells and whistles than this one will afford me from a simple point of view. But this is a great example of how we can quickly achieve scale from processes that have been vetted and verified within an organization. Now, it just requires the configuration. So when I look at the canvas here, we've done the drag drop, we've done the naming, but what we've got left to do is everything with a little orange bracket. So this is a task, we can choose an express approval task, we can fill in the detail, but what we have is a set of requirements that have already been mapped out, as in a purchase request process. So moving into my purchase request automation side of things, we're going to go into Nintex Workflow Cloud. And we're going to do the same thing here that we did with ProMap. We're going to do an end user tour. And then based on the business's request, we're going to make a few tweaks. So the first thing we want to do is submit a form. We're in My Nintex. So My Nintex is where I come in my Workflow Cloud environment to get stuff done. This is where my forms are. This is where my tasks are. And you'll notice that the URL up there is .workflowcloud.com. So it's company.workflowcloud.com. You can have multiple tenants if you've got different divisions, so on and so forth. So I'm going to submit a form, and the form that I want to fill in is my CAPEX request file. So we're going to click on that, and that's going to bring a pop-up into my Nintex. Now, there are other options that you can do. Obviously, it is a URL, so you can either use this standalone on its own, and it's a responsive form. So when it's created, we've said, look, we want this to be available in my Nintex, or we want it to be available in a mobile layout. So we could go to Nintex Mobile, and we could look at the exact same form within my Nintex. So work is no longer somewhere you go; it's something you do. Those sort of methods. If I just go to my mobile emulator here, just drag that in. I open up Nintex Mobile, which is a free download app from the Android or the Google Play Store or the Apple App Store. Go to my forms, search, and you can brand these. You can make them unique to specific sets of forms, sets of workflows and tasks. We'll go to my CAPEX request final. And it's exactly the same form, behaves in the same way, has the same rules. If you see that, if you look at both forms there, we've got an auto set date rule, which is August 30th. We've got an auto pool based on the logged in user. So we support single sign-on through Active Directory or a number of other providers. which will pull that information into the form. So I don't need to worry about that. But if I'm doing raise on request for, I can amend this. I've got my department. This is actually what we call a data source variable. It's a reference to information that exists outside of my workflow. In this instance, we're using a SharePoint list, but it will work with OpenAPI. So I could connect to systems of record, and I can reference the information as a query. So I'm doing a query here on departments, and I can choose my department. Now, we could have easily used the same methods here to actually just fill that in based on the user, but I wanted to show the lookup. We've got a multi-page form here, so we're going to go next. And we've got a little request repeating section. So this is where I'm going to fill in my equipment request. So I've got a vendor, which is, let's say it's Dell. We want 20 items at $1,000 an item, and my total should amend, and so should my grand total. We're going to add another row here, which is something from Microsoft. Let's say it's 20 surfaces that we've ordered. And again, that calculation changes. So we've got variables in the background of the form that are simply doing a calculation by row item. And we're going to pass this grand total back into the workflow to make some decisions. If you recall from my purchase request, we had a plus or a minus 10,000 above, below. In the workflow, we've actually increased that a little bit to 100,000 so that the workflow will actually make that change. And it will go down a CFO route, or it will simply go to a department head route. Date has been filled in for me, and we're going to sign on glass. This is a simple signature panel, not e-sign, not the Nintex e-sign capability yet. What we want to do is simply pass a signature through workflow. We're going to submit. And my workflow at this point will grab any imagery, but also the metadata. It's going to send that submit, and it's bringing me back to my Nintex. Now, for ease of use, I've used the same email as all personas. So I'm going to do requester. I am also going to be the manager. I'm going to be finance, and all of it will come through the same email address. Now, what will happen in a second is this will auto update to my running processes. So I'll have a latest form submission. I'll have any active tasks, of which there should be one, and then I'm going to be able to participate in the workflow. So what does that look like? Got my latest form submission, which is named. It's named the user, which is solution day, which is who I'm logged in on my environment, and the department that we selected. So when we build the workflow, we're just using variables to simply pass those through. So I'm going to jump up to my email, or I could take this on the mobile device where I could respond to tasks as well. So if we go Nintex mobile, we should be able to see a task for this specific request as well. Once that refreshes, new items, got my new CAPEX request. So I've got a task in here, which is going to look exactly the same as the task that's been received. So we can also respond to workflow on the go as well. I've got my notification email, my blood pressure reducing email, which lets the requester know that the system has generated that request. And we're using some live variables in here. So first name, value, and then we're going to simply move into task. So once we're in the task stage, CAPEX requests have been submitted by one of your teams. This is the manager task. Click here to view the task or visit my Nintex. So we can click here. That's going to take me to my Nintex. Or I could simply respond to the email. But I want to know a bit more about the request. And that's maybe something that that we can amend in the workflow. The business would like to see more in that email. I've got an active task here. So let's click on that active task. It's going to load the sidebar and load the task in my Nintex. So this is the task screen, but I don't necessarily know much about the request at this stage. So what I can do is I can go to show form. That's going to bring up the initiation form or the request form within my Nintex. I can have a look at those purchase details. I remember having this discussion with Solution Day, and I can simply approve and pop in some comments. There's a number of rules that we can drive here. If perhaps we reject, we could make this required. or we can simply hide show. We've got a little log here of what's happened for the request, and we're going to submit that off. Task form has successfully been submitted, and it's going to move to the next stage of the workflow. From memory, that's going to go through the decision matrix of, is it above or below $100,000? If it's above, it's going to involve the CFO. If it's below, it's going to go to the next stage. Now, there was a precursor to this as well, which was if it's below 500, it's actually just going to auto approve. So we've got a number of different business rules logic that's built into the workflow. Let's go back to my email. CAPEX request has been submitted. This one's for finance. Let's just go straight into the task. This is the one that we're going to tweak when we go back to workflow. Got my running log here. We can see that it was approved by that person's manager. So we'll select assign. Let's just try and write with the mouse. Let's say this is finance. So we'll have a look at that signature a little bit later on. We could redirect at this stage as well. That might be some feedback that we take on board when we go and tweak the workflow. And then the next stage of my workflow is going to carry on. Now, if I want to have a look at that, I can go back to my Nintex, I can go to my dashboard, I can go to my running submission, and I can actually have a look at where we're at. So I can see my task history. It was approved by here, and I can look at that task. So if we use a task form, ordinarily that means we want to provide more information. So I can have a look at what happened there. Was there comments? Was there signature? Did they change the budget? Did they change the cost center and so on? And I can see that the CAPEX request was also approved by finance. So the next stage, we're going to generate a document. So we're going to get a unique document received on email for signature. We're going to use Nintex Assure sign here. So we've got 2 signatures already in the document. We're going to get a third, but we're going to get this electronically. This is an audited, tracked, and fully governed electronic signature. Nintex Assure sign has told us that a document is ready for signing. So we're going to click on begin signing. We've read the conditions, the terms and conditions, as we all should do, and we're going to type with a keyboard. So, well, let's just add it here, actually, just with the mouse. And adopt. Now here's a little preview of my document that's been automatically generated using a template that is stored in OneDrive, SharePoint, Box, Google Drive, so on and so forth. So it's version controlled, it's security trimmed, and so on. We've got some unique bits of information about that request. So the person that requested it, the sum of money. These are simply tags and variables that have been put into the template. When was it requested? The table. So we got our little table here showing the items that were requested, and we've actually even got the other 2 signatures. I'm going to apply that signature. That then puts that digital, electronic, audited, governed client signature in there. I'm going to click on finish. So Assure sign is then going to send this signed document back into my workflow, and then I can decide what I do with that document once it's been completed. Now we can download a version of that document to the local device and open that up and have a look at all 3 signatures. We've got my requester signature that was on the initial form. We've got my finance signature that was on the task form. And we've got my manager signature that's all fully audited, even on a unique current date and time of signature. Alternatively, we can go back to a data storage. So we can look at my CAPEX request list that I've got built in Microsoft SharePoint as an example, or Dynamics, or SQL, or Salesforce, or any one of 100 native connectors that we've got. I can actually click on this item, which has been created as part of workflow. It's got all the information from the form. SharePoint is a great CMS, so let's use it as one. And I can click on my CAPEX approval PDF, and that has been uploaded as an attachment. So we've now got that attachment where the data actually lives. Now, let's say that the organization has asked for some amendments. They want a small tweak to the workflow. We want to have a look at how easy that is. So we're going to go into the administrator view, and we're going to go to automate in my workflow cloud environment. I want to grab my CAPEX request final, which is my workflow that I've built. And we want to change a few things. Now, everything here is drag drop, the monotony of which is probably worth doing once. And then once you've seen it, you've clicked it, it's pretty self-explanatory. So out of over 700 actions within the suite, we want to change our finance task. And as we scroll down through the workflow, some points of note, here's that auto approval that I was talking about. And what we want to do is go to my finance processing task. So down here's that other CFO task. So this is a branch which says, was the request greater or equal to $100,000? If it was, let's go down the CFO branch and get them to approve as well. If it wasn't, we're just going to do what we call a change stage, which in this instance jumps straight to finance to process. Click on that finance task. And what we want to do is just make this a little bit friendlier. So we're going to go into the forms canvas. These are all the specifics around this task. So we've got the task name, we've got the outcomes of which you can add multiple. Doesn't have to always be approve, reject, doesn't have to be that naming convention, and doesn't have to be a 1 or a 0. So we could say, well, we're going to add a third one, which is a maybe branch or a back to initiator branch, so on and so forth. So we'll just delete that one. And we're going to go and change that form. So let's open up the forms canvas. And again, as with workflow, everything with forms is drag drop. We want to make this form a little bit friendlier. So we've got my normal general controls here, things that we can add, like an address lookup, barcode scanner, choices, email, so on and so forth. We're going to add a real quick label just to let finance know what this form actually is. So we'll go with a CAPEX request. Let's put caps lock on just for that one. CAPEX. Is it on or is it off? CAPEX request form. Let's open this up here just to make it a little bit. Let's go with a heading 1. As you can see, it's a WYSIWYG editor. You can add HTML to this, tables, images, so on and so forth. If we go to settings, if we go to styles, down to our styles canvas, we can add multiple styles. We can even add CSS as a styling convention to these forms if need be. A full rules engine, so things like hide, show, things like make signatures required, or setting a field value, for instance. We've got our variables, which is where we did the calculations in the table in the initial form. And we want to add some specifics about the request. So you could do things like a file upload if you wanted to either upload a document native to the local device or OneDrive or whatever, or that will turn the control on a camera on the phone into the camera, so you're able to take imagery as well. But what we want to do is we actually want to add some start event variables here. So we're just going to condense, and we want to add, let's add a group to the top. And we want to make this group, we'll give this group a quick name. So we'll say that this is the request details. Let's just change the styling a little bit, make it a bit more obvious. I'm going to go back down to my start event. So what we can do is we can actually pull bits of information in from that initial start event. So we can say things like, what's the first name and the last name that were provided as part of it? What was the department that was provided as part of the request? And then we can put things like the date. So what was the date, or what was the grand total? We can say the grand total. Let's just, for sake of ease of use, let's pop that in and go back to that. So that's going to give finance a little bit more information. So they don't have to go to my Nintex to view the request. They could actually just do that straight from the task form. Apply changes in there. And now if we were to rerun this process and go to the finance task, what they would see is not only their approve reject status, but if we go to preview, when this has been provided, they'll see that information. So from the email, clicking on that task form link is going to give them all the information that they need to make that decision. Really easy just to apply those changes, publish the new workflow. That's going to give me a changed workflow definition. It's going to keep that link. And I'm just going to complete the suite here by editing my purchase request process to add that URL back into ProMap. Copy that out. I'm going to go back to my purchase request and edit. We're going to edit this 1B here. We're going to make that URL, web link. The display label here is my CAPEX form. Let's put in the link and complete. Change this here, complete the CAPEX form, and we're done. So that's an overview of Nintex ProMap from a end user, but also making changes as a ProMaster into Nintex Workflow Cloud, forms, mobile app, workflow, document automation, and also Nintex AssureSide. Thank you very much for watching. More than happy to take any questions. Bye for now.